The morning of March 12th, 2026, 10:15 a.m., the long corridor inside Buckingham Palace suddenly fell into a silence so deep that every footstep echoed sharply against the marble floor. Royal aides froze in place. Security staff exchanged uneasy glances, and in the center of that charged stillness, Prince William stepped forward and stopped in front of Queen Camilla. His gaze was cold, his voice low and resolute. "The Treasury is not your private dowry." A single sentence, yet it struck like a hammer against the very foundation of an entire reign. Less than 60 seconds later, a series of decisions moved rapidly through the palace internal system. 12 members within Camilla family network were abruptly cut off from all financial support linked to royal funds. No prior warning, no negotiation, no way out. Numbers began circulating among royal observers. £14,850,200. A staggering sum believed to have flowed through funds and family connections for years, and that was only the tip of the iceberg. Behind the scenes, even more shocking details began to surface. A confession reportedly coming from Andrew Parker Bowles, a silver USB stored inside a secure vault at a private bank in Zurich. Financial data that, if revealed, could shake the entire power structure of the House of Windsor. For the public, this was no longer a typical family dispute. Many commentators described it as the most ruthless financial purge in modern royal history, an internal conflict capable of destabilizing the monarchy itself. So the biggest question now is this: is Prince William protecting taxpayer money? Or has he gone too far in a power struggle inside the palace? Leave your comment now. Number 1, if you support William. Number 2, if you believe Camilla is being treated unfairly. I will read and respond to all of them. But to understand why everything exploded with such force, we need to go back in time, back to the very first seeds of this conflict. On April 15th, 2025, an operation never officially announced quietly began inside Buckingham Palace. There was no press release, no public schedule, and certainly no media presence. Yet internally, one name circulated with unmistakable caution: Operation Clean Slate. A large-scale financial audit reportedly approved by Prince William himself, with a single objective: to clean up the entire flow of money operating behind the royal curtain. At first, many believed this was merely a routine review, a symbolic move designed to reinforce the image of transparency in a new era. But within weeks, the atmosphere began to shift. Independent auditors were brought in with unprecedented access. Accounts long overlooked were suddenly reopened. Auxiliary funds, undisclosed expenditures, and especially transactions linked to external companies were examined down to the smallest detail. Then the first number appeared: £14,850,200, a massive sum discovered to have been withdrawn from royal-related funds through a network of 8 shell companies based in tax havens. The company names sounded harmless: Strategic Consulting, Image Communications, Reputation Management. But when records were compared, a troubling pattern began to emerge. Among them, one company drew particular attention: registered as an image consulting firm. It was on paper responsible for improving the public image of high-profile individuals. Yet within 36 months, more than £4,322,180 had been transferred into its account. And what auditors could not ignore was its ownership structure. Internal documents indicated direct links between the company and individuals close to Queen Camilla family. This was no longer vague suspicion. It was an organized chain of transactions spanning years, with clear signs of money being redirected through complex legal layers. When the preliminary report was placed on the table, everyone in the room understood they were facing an issue that could not be resolved through silence. According to internal sources, the entire file was then delivered directly to Prince William. No intermediaries, no communications office, And what followed became one of the most talked-about moments behind palace doors. In a private room, beneath a portrait of Princess Diana, William sat alone with a document stacked hundreds of pages thick. No one was allowed to disturb him. No aides, no advisors, only him, the numbers, and the cold lines of data. 4 hours passed in absolute silence. Those waiting outside could only speculate about what was unfolding behind the closed door. Some said he barely moved. Others recalled that he read each page slowly, as if trying to piece together a picture that had been torn apart for years. For William, this was not merely a financial issue. It touched something deeper: trust, legacy, and how the monarchy is seen in the eyes of the public. When he finally stepped out of that room, no statement was made. But according to those who witnessed it, his expression had completely changed. No longer the caution of an heir. It was the cold resolve of a man who had made his decision. From that moment, Operation Clean Slate was no longer an audit. It became a campaign. Financial flows were frozen. Connections were re-examined. Names once considered untouchable began appearing on internal investigation lists. And what made the entire situation more dangerous than ever was the fact that these numbers did not stand alone. They were only the visible surface of a far more complex structure, where finance, power, and personal relationships were intertwined in ways that very few could fully see. Because the deeper the auditors went, the more they realized that this network was not simply a collection of suspicious transactions. It showed signs of being systematically constructed, with the clear objective of protecting and concealing financial flows over a long period of time. Then, just when everything already seemed shocking enough, a new detail began to emerge from the files. Not a number, not an account, but a voice, a confession recorded in the past. One that could completely change how everything was being understood. The numbers were only the surface. The real secret lay in a voice from the past. On April 15th, 2025, at the very moment Operation Clean Slate had just been activated, a recording lasting 6 minutes and 42 seconds was created in a sealed room, with no recording devices except a single unit placed at the center of the table. The voice in that recording did not belong to a stranger. It was Andrew Parker Bowles, a name deeply tied to the complex layers of royal history, and a man who understood better than anyone the quiet connections behind the scenes. But what made this recording extraordinary was not the identity of the speaker, but the content he chose to leave behind. For the entire 6 minutes and 42 seconds, Andrew did not hesitate. He did not evade. He described what he called a strategic infiltration lasting 3 decades. According to him, this was not a series of isolated transactions or financial mistakes. It was a structure built deliberately, step by step, embedding itself into the royal financial system through layers of legal cover. Small expenses that appeared harmless gradually became stable financial streams, maintained over many years without drawing attention. He mentioned a concept that would make anyone pause: ghost stipends, unofficial allowances, not fully recorded in public reports, yet existing as recurring payments. According to Andrew, this was one of the most effective tools for maintaining financial flows without leaving clear traces. These funds were dispersed across multiple channels and accounts, eventually converging at points that very few could trace. Then he spoke about what he called the black files, not ordinary documents, but collections of financial data, contracts, and sensitive information stored outside the official system. 2 locations were mentioned clearly: the Cayman Islands and Zurich. According to Andrew, this was where the most critical data was kept, not for daily use, but as protection for the structure when necessary, a form of power insurance, in case anything went off course. The most shocking element of the entire recording was not the method, but the scale. Andrew asserted that the figure of more than £14 million that had been discovered was only the tip of the iceberg, a small fraction of a much larger system that had operated silently for many years. If what he said was accurate, then this was no longer a single financial case. It was a systematically constructed network, with a depth that even those inside it could hardly fully grasp. However, what made the situation even more tense was the timing of when the recording was delivered. Although it had been recorded in April 2025, it was not until March 9, 2026 that it was placed into the hands of Prince William. It did not pass through any official channel. There was no clear trace of any intermediary, only a package of data delivered with content powerful enough to shift the entire landscape. According to close sources, William listened to the recording for the first time at Adelaide Cottage, not in a meeting room, not in front of advisors, but in a private space where he could confront what was being revealed directly. And notably, he did not listen just once. He replayed it multiple times, as if verifying every detail, every word. Those close to William later recalled that his reaction was not an immediate outburst. There was no public anger, no rushed statement. Instead, there was a prolonged silence, a pause long enough for everything to settle, yet also long enough for a major decision to take shape. For William, this recording did not merely provide information. It changed how he viewed the entire system he was preparing to inherit. If what Andrew said was true, then this was no longer about image management or handling media crises. It was a question about the integrity of the monarchy itself. And that was the moment many believe a transformation occurred. From a cautious air, William began to be seen as someone ready to act, someone not only protecting reputation, but willing to confront structures that had existed for years. Some sources even described his resolve with a single word: crusade, a campaign that was personal in nature, yet carried consequences far beyond the personal. When the recording ended, the room at Adelaide Cottage fell into silence. There was no one there to witness that moment except William himself. But what followed spoke for everything. Audit orders were intensified. Accounts were flagged. Connections were monitored more closely than ever before. And most importantly, time was no longer on anyone's side. Because once such evidence was in hand, waiting was no longer an option. Every passing minute carried the risk that information could be leaked, concealed, or erased. For William, the decision appeared to have been made very early. No delay, no compromise, no half measures. And that is why, only a few days after receiving the recording, a series of decisive actions began to unfold behind palace doors. No prior announcement, no warning, only sudden changes, executed with precise calculation down to every detail. Because with this evidence in his hands, William no longer had any reason to wait. He was ready to cut off the lifeline of an entire network. After the recording was replayed again and again in the stillness of Adelaide Cottage, everything moved into a completely different phase. It was no longer about gathering information, no longer about analysis. This was when action began. And at the center of that entire strategy was an internal mechanism that very few had ever heard of. Oxygen cut. A short term, but one with a clear meaning. To sever the financial lifeline of the entire network through a chain of coordinated actions, executed so quickly and precisely that no opportunity for response remained. According to legal sources, Prince William relied on a rarely used clause within the Sovereign Grant Act. This provision allowed the future head of the monarchy to redefine certain financial behaviors as a security threat, not national security in the traditional sense, but the security of the royal family structure itself, especially when such actions could directly affect the line of succession. In William interpretation, the redirection of financial flows through opaque structures was not merely a financial violation, it was a risk, a threat capable of undermining public trust, and in doing so, endangering the future of his children. This definition opened a legal pathway broad enough for him to implement a series of unprecedented measures. The first phase was called identification. Not a single investigation, but a process of mapping the entire network of relationships. Every name was placed on the list. Not only those directly receiving money, but also individuals indirectly connected through companies, funds, and intermediary accounts. A financial family tree was constructed, detailed enough to trace each flow of money through every layer before reaching its final destination. And at the center of that network were links surrounding the family of Queen Camilla. Once the map was complete, the second phase was activated. Transparency threshold? A transparency limit was set at £500. Any transaction exceeding that amount had to be fully explained, with complete supporting documentation. It sounded simple, but in practice it was an extremely effective tightening mechanism, because it completely dismantled the system of dispersing funds through small amounts. Payments that had once been split to avoid attention were now forced into the open. Within days, the system began to react. Waves of explanation requests were sent out. Accounts were flagged. Transactions that had once moved quietly were now dragged into the light. And most critically, the response time was reduced to a point where maneuvering became almost impossible. The third phase came faster than anyone expected. This was where Oxygen Cut revealed its true nature. No more warnings, no more room for negotiation. A series of credit cards linked to suspected accounts suddenly stopped functioning. Limits were frozen. Transfers were blocked immediately. Those involved only realized what was happening when they could no longer carry out even the most basic transactions. A payment declined. A bill left unpaid. A bank account that no longer responded. Within hours, a network that had operated smoothly for years fell into complete paralysis. But if cut was the direct strike, the final phase was the true finishing blow. Repossession. A series of legal notices were issued with a clear deadline. 21 days. 3 high-value properties connected to the network were ordered to be surrendered. No extensions. No exceptions. At the same time, insurance contracts were frozen. Loans were called in. The final layers of financial protection were systematically removed. And this created an irreversible chain reaction. When assets were no longer protected, their value dropped sharply. When value dropped, borrowing capacity disappeared. And without access to credit, the entire financial structure began collapsing from within. The most shocking figure was not the amount of money frozen, but the speed of the collapse. In an extremely short period of time, the entire network connected to the Parker Bowles family fell into a state of insolvency. Insolvent. A single word, yet enough to describe the downfall of a system that had existed for many years. For outside observers, this was a ruthless move, a financial purge carried out with near-perfect precision. But for William, according to close sources, it was an unavoidable step. Once a system had been infiltrated, it could not be cleaned in fragments. It had to be done completely. What made this entire campaign remarkable was not only the outcome, but the way it was executed. There were no significant leaks throughout the process. No external interference. Everything unfolded within a tightly controlled circle, with the number of people aware of the operation kept to an absolute minimum. And as the effects began to spread, those involved gradually realized the true scale of what was happening. This was no longer an internal adjustment. It was a full-scale restructuring, aimed not only at addressing violations, but at redefining the entire operating framework of the royal financial system. But in every conflict, there is always a response from the other side, and this time was no exception. As funds were cut, as assets were reclaimed, as layers of protection disappeared one by one, the silence did not last long, because on the other side of this purge, Queen Camilla was not someone who would accept defeat easily. But when the money was cut off, Camilla did not remain silent. She struck back. According to multiple close sources, the first direct confrontation between Queen Camilla and Prince William took place in a private room inside Buckingham Palace. No press, no advisors, only those directly involved. But what happened inside that room quickly became a story whispered throughout the palace corridors. Camilla entered with anger she could not conceal. Financial reports, freezing orders, repossession notices had pushed her into a position she had never faced before. And then, in a moment many described as a loss of control, she hurled a porcelain cup to the floor. The sound of it shattering echoed like a signal that every boundary had been broken. Her voice trembled with anger as she faced William. "You are killing your father for the sake of a ghost." The sentence was not only directed at his present actions, it also pulled in a past that had never truly been resolved. The word ghost needed no explanation. It pointed to Princess Diana, a name that has always lingered like a shadow over every relationship within this family. In that moment, the room fell into silence. Those present understood that this was no longer a debate about finances. This was a collision between two completely different views of the past and of responsibility. William did not respond immediately. According to witnesses, he stood still for several seconds, his eyes fixed on Camilla. Then he replied, his voice low but firm, "I will not let my mother's legacy pay for your family silence." That response was more than a rebuttal. It was a declaration, a clear line drawn between two generations, two approaches, and two systems of values. For William, this was not only about addressing financial misconduct, it was how he chose to protect the memory of his mother, and how he intended to redefine the future of the monarchy. The confrontation ended without compromise. No handshake. No sign that either side would find common ground anytime soon. But its consequences spread almost immediately. At Highgrove House, King Charles III was said to have followed the entire development with a clear sense of helplessness. He did not directly take part in the confrontation, yet its impact on him was undeniable. On one side was the wife, who had stood beside him through years of turmoil. On the other was the son, who would inherit everything he would leave behind. Those close to Charles said he fell into a state of unprecedented difficulty. Any public support could be interpreted as taking sides, and in a conflict so deeply personal, choosing one side meant wounding the other. Meanwhile, outside the palace, public reaction began to form at remarkable speed. Informal polls showed a significant rise in support for William, 68%, a figure reflecting a belief that he was acting to protect transparency and the legitimacy of the monarchy. In contrast, support for Camilla dropped to a historic low, 15%, a gap that was not just numerical, but a sign of a major shift in how the public viewed her role. What made the situation more complex was that these numbers did not remain on paper. They began to influence how other members of the family responded. Some chose silence. Some kept their distance. Others began to reconsider their position within a power structure that was rapidly changing. For many observers, this marked a turning point, not because of the scale of the conflict, but because of how it exposed fractures that had long existed, tensions between tradition and modernity, between personal loyalty and public duty, and most importantly, between the past and the future of the monarchy. In this context, every action and every statement carried greater weight than ever before. There was no longer room for half measures, no space for temporary solutions. And as all eyes remained fixed on Buckingham Palace, a new development began to take shape elsewhere, a place less visible, yet potentially capable of altering the entire balance. Because while the confrontation between William and Camilla dominated attention, another shadow was quietly approaching. Another figure, another center of power, preparing to enter the game. Then, from Clarence House, an unexpected move began to emerge. On March 13th, 2026. While the aftermath of the internal confrontation still lingered through the corridors of power, another development unfolded quietly, thousands of kilometers away. There were no camera flashes, no official announcement, only a courier, appearing and disappearing in absolute silence. The destination was a private bank deep within Zurich, known for some of the highest levels of secure storage in the world. According to leaked sources, the item delivered was not a thick file or a suitcase of documents. It was small enough to fit in the palm of a hand. A silver USB, a silver drive. Yet its modest size concealed content capable of shaking not only the monarchy, but the international financial system. The device was said to contain multiple layers of data. First, unpublished video recordings capturing internal discussions and informal agreements related to financial flows that had been hidden for years. These recordings, if made public, could trigger a media earthquake, because they did not merely show numbers. They captured people, voices, and decisions made behind closed doors. But that was only the beginning. The most critical component lay in a set of decryption keys stored within the device. These keys were designed to unlock what had earlier been referred to as the black files, a distributed data system stored across financial havens and protected by multiple layers of encryption. Once activated, the entire structure of information would become transparent. Accounts, transactions, and connections between individuals and organizations would be exposed without any remaining shield. What made the silver drive truly dangerous was not only its content, but the mechanism attached to it. A dead man's switch, a system pre-programmed to operate independently of any individual, will once activated. According to technology experts, it functioned on a simple yet highly effective principle. If a specific condition was not met within a defined period of time, the data would automatically be distributed to a network of servers and media partners across the globe. In the current context, that condition was believed to be directly linked to the actions of Prince William. If he continued the oxygen cut campaign without adjustment or pause, the system would interpret it as a trigger. And once the distribution process began, there would be almost no way to stop it. Sources describe this scenario with a single phrase: digital Armageddon. A digital catastrophe in which financial secrets kept hidden for years could be exposed within hours, not limited to a single family or organization, but potentially involving individuals and financial systems across multiple countries. What was notable was the location of the device. It was not in the hands of any member of the royal family. It was locked within a storage facility in Zurich, protected by independent security protocols. This meant that no one could simply access and disable it. Every move would have to be calculated carefully, because any mistake could trigger the release mechanism. Meanwhile, information about the existence of the silver drive began to circulate within internal circles, not loudly, but enough to create a wave of concern. Because for the first time, this conflict was no longer confined to finance or family power. It had expanded into a new domain: technology, data, and control of information. For William, this was an unprecedented situation. On one side was the objective of cleansing the system and protecting the legitimacy of the monarchy. On the other was the risk of triggering a chain of events with uncontrollable consequences. Every step from this point forward carried the highest level of risk. And the central question began to emerge: would he continue forward despite the danger, or choose another path to avoid a global crisis? Would William step back, or was the monarchy now standing at a crossroads where every choice came with an immeasurable cost? At this moment, as all the pieces began to surface, royal observers started to outline a scenario tree. 3 possible futures, each carrying consequences significant enough to reshape the history of the House of Windsor. It was no longer a question of who was right or wrong. It was a question of what would happen next. The first scenario, and also the worst case, is called disaster. if the dead man switch is triggered, if the silver drive in Zurich truly releases its data globally, the consequences will not stop at a financial scandal. It could lead to a collapse of trust in the entire monarchy. Offshore accounts exposed. Overlapping financial relationships laid bare. And at that point, the monarchy would face not only a media crisis, but a crisis of survival. The second scenario is called cleansing. In this case, Prince William does not step back. He continues his campaign to the end. But with precise risk control. The Parker Bowles network is completely dismantled. Financial flows are cut off. And a new financial structure is established. More transparent and more disciplined. In the eyes of many, this is the path where William becomes a shadow sovereign. A man not yet crowned, but already holding real control over how the monarchy operates. The final scenario is disillusionment, a less dramatic path, but no less dangerous. In this case, William chooses to step back to avoid a major crisis. The campaign slows down, measures are relaxed, and over time, the old system gradually returns. There is no dramatic collapse, but there is also no real change. A slow decay unfolds quietly, eroding the credibility of the monarchy from within. What is notable is that most current analysis leans toward the second scenario. Cleansing. What has unfolded so far suggests a clear trajectory. Decisive, calculated, and not easily reversed. If that is true, then we are not simply witnessing a crisis. We are witnessing a restructuring of power. A moment in which the future of an entire dynasty is being rewritten. Step by step. Right before our eyes. After everything that has happened, one thing is almost impossible to deny. Prince William has won the battle over money. Financial flows have been tightened. The network linked to the family of Queen Camilla has been nearly neutralized within a short time. Figures once hidden have now been brought into the light. And for the first time in many years, the financial structure of the House of Windsor stands before a real opportunity for reconstruction. But if you think the story ends there, then everything may only be beginning. Because victory over money does not mean victory over honor. And on the other side of the board, the silver drive still rests silently in storage in Zurich. A reminder that nothing is truly over. It is not just a data storage device. It is leverage, a piece that can change the entire situation in a single moment. If activated, it could turn what appears to be a victory into a full-scale crisis. But if it is only a psychological move, a carefully calculated bluff, then it reveals that the level of tension and complexity in this conflict has gone far beyond all initial expectations. And that is exactly what makes this story so compelling. There are no clear answers. No absolute line between right and wrong. Only choices. And the consequences that come with each of them. So what about you? How do you see the silver drive? A real threat? Or just a tool of pressure in this power struggle? Leave your comment below. Type clean slate if you support William in clearing the entire system. If you want to continue following the latest developments, do not forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, because this story is still unfolding, and each passing day may bring a new turning point, because the clock is still counting down. The truth is moving closer to the crown, and when it arrives, there will be no turning back. See you in the next update.